The Galactic Federation's Outpost Station 15 had been designed by committee, which explained why it looked like someone had thrown architectural blueprints into a blender and hit puree. What the designers hadn't anticipated, however, was that their multi-species education facility would become ground zero for the galaxy's most adorable war crimes. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Commander Lila stood in the observation deck, watching what could generously be called organized chaos unfold in the facility's main common area below. A pack of Vorthac cubs, imagine wolves that had learned to walk upright and developed an unhealthy obsession with human fashion accessories, were currently engaged in what their species probably called social hierarchy establishment, but what everyone else called complete mayhem. Commander Lila. The voice belonged to Kel, the station's administrator, whose species had evolved anxiety into an art form. Their lavender-tinted skin had turned a distinctly queasy shade of green, and their 4 arms were gesticulating in what Lila had learned to recognize as the universal sign for everything is terrible, and I need an adult. Let me guess, Lila said without turning around. The cubs are at it again. They've barricaded themselves in Section C with stolen footwear and are holding a Melloran child's lunch belt hostage, Kel's voice cracked. This is the 6th incident this cycle, and I'm running out of forms to file. Below them, 3 Vorthac cubs were indeed engaged in what appeared to be a strategic military operation centered around a pair of standard-issue Federation combat boots. The largest cub, his dark fur marked with silver streaks that would have been handsome if he weren't currently using them to intimidate a group of herbivorous younglings, clutched one boot like a trophy. His packmates circled him with the focused intensity of sharks who'd discovered philosophy. You know, Lila mused, most species go through an adolescent phase where they rebel against authority, experiment with identity, or develop crushes on inappropriate individuals. Leave it to a predator species to weaponize fashion accessories. The second cub, sleeker and more calculating than her larger companion, had claimed the other boot and was now engaged in what could only be described as psychological warfare. She'd positioned herself between the cowering Melloran child and the exit, the stolen lunch belt wrapped around her shoulders like some sort of bizarre ceremonial sash. The previous 3 specialists fled the station, Kel continued, their tone suggesting they'd rather be fleeing too. One claimed the cubs were beyond rehabilitation. Another said they were fundamentally incompatible with civilized society. The third just screamed and demanded immediate transport to the outer rim. Lila finally turned from the window, raising an eyebrow. And the 4th specialist? We're hoping you'll be more creative in your approach. The smallest of the 3 cubs caught Lila's attention. Unlike his packmates, who were reveling in their dominance display, this one seemed almost uncomfortable with the situation. He kept glancing between the terrified younglings and his fellow cubs, as if trying to figure out how he'd ended up in this particular mess. Tell me, Kel, Lila said, her voice taking on the tone that had once made enemy generals reconsider their life choices. What exactly did these previous specialists try? Standard behavioral modification protocols, negative reinforcement, separation techniques, resource redistribution, even meditation therapy. Kel's skin shifted through several shades of distress. Nothing worked. If anything, the cubs seemed to find new and more creative ways to cause disruption. Lila watched as the largest cub, she'd have to give them names eventually, began what appeared to be a victory dance around his captured boot. And their obsession with human accessories specifically? It started 3 cycles ago when a human trader left behind some personal items. The cubs became fixated. They began stealing similar objects from other species. But they show particular interest in anything that resembles human footwear or waist accessories. The irony wasn't lost on Lila. Humans had spent centuries being told they were primitive, aggressive, and unsuitable for polite galactic society. Now, apparently, they'd become a fashion influence on predator children. There was probably a dissertation in that somewhere, assuming anyone survived long enough to write it. A crash from below drew their attention back to the situation at hand. The cubs had apparently decided that one pair of boots wasn't sufficient for their needs, and were now attempting to construct some sort of footwear fortress using furniture and stolen lunch containers. The Mellerin child's parents are threatening to withdraw from the program, Kell added helplessly, along with 16 other families. The Federation Council is asking questions. There's talk of shutting down the entire multi-species education initiative. Because of 3 cubs with a shoe fetish? Because of 3 cubs who've managed to terrorize an entire station and make interspecies cooperation look like the galaxy's worst idea, since someone decided to give the Klaxon species access to sound amplification technology. Lila had to admit, watching the situation unfold was like witnessing a masterclass in tactical thinking gone horribly wrong. The cubs weren't just randomly causing chaos. They were demonstrating coordinated strategy, resource control, and territorial dominance. In other circumstances, she might have been impressed. "What's their pack structure like?" she asked. Pack structure. Hierarchy. Leadership. Social organization. Lila gestured toward the cubs. "They're not acting randomly, Kell. Look at them. The big one's clearly the alpha. He claimed the primary prize and is now defending it. The female is controlling territory and resources. The smaller one." She paused, studying the 3rd cub more carefully. "The smaller one is conflicted. I'm not sure I understand how this helps us solve the problem." "It doesn't solve it," Lila said, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It explains it. These cubs aren't broken, Kell. They're doing exactly what their species is supposed to do, establishing pack hierarchy, claiming territory, and demonstrating dominance. The problem is that everyone's been trying to stop them from being Vorthac, instead of giving them a better way to be Vorthac." Another crash echoed from below as the cubs' footwear fortress expanded to include what appeared to be a makeshift watchtower constructed entirely from stolen belts. "I don't suppose you have any brilliant human insights into predator pack behavior?" Kell asked hopefully. Lila's smile widened. "As a matter of fact, I do. But first, I'm going to need you to gather every piece of human-style footwear and belt on this station. Everything. Boots, shoes, sandals, utility belts, dress belts, even those ridiculous decorative sashes the diplomatic corps is so fond of." "Everything? But that's hundreds of items. What are you planning to do with them?" "Something that'll either solve this problem permanently," Lila said, heading toward the door, "or get me added to the Federation's list of humans who probably shouldn't be allowed near other species' children." As she left the observation deck, she could hear Kell muttering behind her in their native language. She didn't need a universal translator to know they were probably questioning their life choices. Below, the cubs continued their siege, blissfully unaware that their reign of adorable terror was about to meet humanity's oldest solution to pack behavior problems, giving them something better to do with all that energy. After all, Humans had been turning chaos into order for millennia. They just usually called it military service. 2 hours later, Leela stood outside Section C with what looked like the galaxy's most eclectic garage sales spread across 3 hover carts. Combat boots, dress shoes, ceremonial sandals, utility belts, fashion accessories, and even a few items she was pretty sure violated several taste regulations, all confiscated from various quarters across the station. The Cubs had gone suspiciously quiet, which in Lila's experience meant they were either planning something spectacular or had fallen asleep in their stolen footwear fortress. Given that Vorthac Cubs could apparently go 16 hours without rest when properly motivated, she was betting on the former. "You know," she called through the sealed door, "I've got something out here that might interest you." Silence. Then, barely audible through the reinforced barrier, the sound of hushed conversation in what she assumed was Vorthac. It sounded like a tactical briefing, which was both adorable and slightly concerning. "I've got boots," she continued conversationally. "Really nice ones. Military grade. Federation Special Forces issue. The kind with actual tactical features, not just the standard issue stuff you've been playing with." A thump against the door. Definitely interested. And belts. Command-level utility belts with real functionality. Holsters, tool attachments, rank insignia, the works. More thumping, followed by what sounded suspiciously like an argument. The largest Cub's voice, deeper than the others, seemed to be advocating for something while the female's sharper tones suggested skepticism. The smallest Cub wasn't saying much, but Lila could hear him moving around, probably trying to get a better position to see through whatever gaps they'd left in their barricade. "Here's the thing, though," Lila said, settling herself against the wall with the practiced patience of someone who'd negotiated with everyone from stubborn generals to corner-cutting contractors. "These aren't just accessories. They're earned. In human military culture, you don't just get to wear the good stuff. You have to prove you deserve it." The conversation inside stopped abruptly. "See, we figured out a long time ago that the Cubs who want the fancy gear the most are usually the ones who need to learn responsibility first. So we created this system. We call it rank structure. You start with basic equipment. And as you demonstrate competence, leadership, and commitment to protecting others instead of just dominating them, you earn better gear." A new voice joined the conversation inside, the smallest Cub, speaking rapidly in urgent tones. Whatever he was saying seemed to be generating considerable debate. "The really interesting part," Lila continued, "is that the beings who earn the best equipment aren't necessarily the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes they're the ones who figure out how to make everyone else stronger, too." The door unsealed with a soft hiss. The largest Cub, she really did need names for them, emerged first, still clutching his claimed boot, but holding it more like a shield than a trophy. His silver-streaked fur was disheveled from whatever architectural projects they'd been undertaking, and his amber eyes held the wary intelligence of a predator, trying to determine if this was a trap. "You're the human," he said, his voice carrying the awkward formality of someone using a language that wasn't quite native. "The military one. I am. And you're the alpha of this pack, I'm guessing." He straightened, pride and uncertainty warring across his expression. "I am Vex. This is my territory. Good to meet you, Vex. I'm Lila." She gestured toward the hover carts. "This is my offering to your pack." The female Cub, sleeker, more calculating, emerged next, the stolen lunch belt still draped across her shoulders like a banner. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned early that speed and intelligence could compensate for smaller size. I'm Nix, she announced, studying the collection of gear with obvious hunger. What's the catch, human? Lila had to admire the directness. Smart question. The catch is that you have to earn them, and the way you earn them isn't by taking them from others or fighting over them. It's by proving you can use them to protect and serve others instead of just yourselves. The smallest cub emerged last, practically vibrating with nervous energy. His fur was a lighter shade than the others, marked with distinctive white patches that made him look younger than he probably was. He kept glancing between his pack mates and the gear display, as if trying to solve a complex equation. I'm Zim, he said quietly. What does protect and serve mean for cubs like us? And there it was, the question that proved Lila's hypothesis correct. These weren't malicious destroyers. They were young predators trying to figure out how to channel their instincts in a multi-species environment that didn't have natural outlets for their behavioral needs. It means, Lila said, crouching down to their eye level, that instead of being the ones everyone's afraid of, you become the ones everyone can count on. Instead of taking things from smaller species, you make sure smaller species are safe. Instead of fighting each other for dominance, you work together to earn the right to lead. Vex's grip on his boot loosened slightly. But we are predators. Fighting is what we do. Fighting is one thing you can do, Lila corrected. But humans learned something interesting about predators over the centuries. The ones who only know how to fight usually don't survive very long. The ones who learn when to fight, who to fight for, and how to fight as part of a team, those are the ones who become legends. She stood, moving to the first hover cart. These basic boots here? They're for cubs who can demonstrate they can work together for a full cycle without causing disruption. These utility belts? They're for cubs who can show leadership by helping younger ones instead of intimidating them. Nix's eyes narrowed with interest. And the fancy ones? Those, Lila said, indicating a set of genuine Special Forces combat boots that had seen actual battle, are for cubs who can prove they're ready to be junior guards. Protectors. The ones other species look to when they need help instead of hiding from when they need safety. The three cubs exchanged glances, having one of those rapid, nonverbal conversations that pack species seem to excel at. Lila waited, letting them process the implications. This is backwards, Vex said finally. We are strong. We take what we want. That is the way. Is it working for you? Lila asked mildly. Because from where I stand, you've got three cubs hiding in a barricade, an entire station afraid of you, and a collection of accessories that you can't even enjoy because you're too busy defending them from each other. Zim spoke up, his voice stronger than before. What would we have to do? To earn the basic gear? Work together. For one full cycle, I want to see coordinated behavior instead of competitive behavior. I want to see you helping younger species instead of intimidating them. I want to see problem-solving that doesn't involve theft or property destruction. And if we do this, Nix asked, we get to keep what we earn? You get to keep what you earn, and you get the chance to earn better. But here's the thing. Once you accept gear that marks you as protectors, you become responsible for living up to that standard. Other cubs will look up to you. Younger species will count on you. The entire station will judge whether this experiment works based on how you handle that responsibility. The cubs fell silent, the weight of the proposition settling over them like a challenge they weren't sure they were ready for. We need to discuss this, Vex said formally, as a pack. Fair enough, Lila agreed. You've got until the end of this shift to decide. But while you're discussing, consider this. Right now, you're feared. If this works, you could be respected instead. And in my experience, respect lasts a lot longer than fear. As the cubs retreated back into Section C for their conference, Lila couldn't help but smile. She'd just offered 3 predator adolescents the chance to transform their natural instincts into structured purpose. The waiting was the hard part. Leela had learned patience during her military career, but there was something uniquely nerve-wracking about negotiating with beings whose decision-making process involved a lot of growling and what sounded like ceremonial posturing. Every few minutes, one of the cubs would peek out to study the gear display, then disappear back into their makeshift fortress for another round of heated discussion. Kel appeared at her elbow, materializing with the nervous energy of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from multiple angles. "Commander, I've been reviewing your proposal, and while I appreciate the creative approach, I have to ask, what if they reject it?" "Then we're no worse off than we were this morning," Lila replied, though privately she was running through contingency plans. "But I don't think they will." "How can you be so certain?" Lila nodded toward Section C, where the sound of debate had shifted into something that sounded more like planning. "Because they're not actually rejecting structure. They're craving it. Look at what they built in there. That's not random destruction, Kel. That's fortress architecture. They've been trying to create their own hierarchy and territory markers this whole time, but without any framework to make it meaningful. I'm not sure I understand the distinction. When human cubs act out, it's usually because they're trying to find their place in the world. They push boundaries to see where the limits are. They compete with each other to establish their capabilities, and they seek validation from authority figures even while they're rebelling against them. Lila gestured toward the sealed door. These 3 have been doing all of that, but in an environment that kept telling them their instincts were wrong instead of giving them appropriate outlets. A particularly loud thump echoed from Section C, followed by what sounded suspiciously like applause. "The genius of military structure," Lila continued, "is that it takes all those problematic impulses, aggression, competitiveness, the need for dominance, and gives them constructive channels. You want to prove you're the strongest? Fine, but you do it by protecting those who can't protect themselves. You want recognition? Earn it by demonstrating skills that benefit the group. You want to lead? Show that you can make others better, not just dominate them." Kel's skin shifted through several contemplative colors. "And you think this will work with predator species?" "I think it'll work better with predator species than with most others. They already have the fundamental drives. They just need direction." Lila paused as the sounds from Section C grew quieter, more focused. "The real test isn't whether they accept the deal. It's whether they can adapt their pack dynamics to include protection of other species instead of just dominance over them." The door to Section C opened again, and this time all 3 cubs emerged together, moving with a coordination that hadn't been present during their earlier territorial displays. They'd arranged themselves in what Lila recognized as a formal presentation formation, Vex in the center as spokesman, Nix and Zim flanking him in support positions. "We have reached a decision," Vex announced, his voice carrying new gravity. "We accept your challenge, human Lila. But we have conditions." "I'm listening." "If we succeed in earning these uniforms," Nix stepped forward slightly, "we want to be called Junior Guards officially. Not just as a title, but with real authority to protect the smaller species on this station." Lila raised an eyebrow. They were asking for actual responsibility, not just the appearance of it. And, Zim added, his voice steadier than she'd heard it before, "if we fail, we accept whatever consequences you and the station administration decide, including separation from the pack if necessary. The weight of that statement hit Lila immediately. For pack-bonded species, separation was one of the most severe punishments imaginable. They weren't just agreeing to try. They were putting everything they valued on the line. "Those are significant stakes," she said carefully. "We are Vorthac," Vex replied, pride resonating in every word. "We do not make small bets." Lila extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement, then remembered her audience and instead offered a formal nod of respect. "Then we have an agreement. Your trial period begins now. 1 full cycle to demonstrate coordinated protective behavior instead of competitive dominance. Success earns you basic gear and the chance to work toward junior guard status. Failure will not happen," all 3 cubs said in unison, their voices carrying the absolute certainty of youth and determination. Now she just had to hope they were smart enough to make it work. The first sign that something fundamental had shifted came 6 hours into the trial period, when a group of Melleran younglings approached Lila in the station's main corridor with what could only be described as cautious optimism. "Commander," the eldest of them said, his translator struggling with the formal inflection, "the Predator Cubs helped us retrieve our educational materials from the high storage compartments. They asked permission first." Lila blinked. "They asked permission? And they worked together," another youngling added, practically vibrating with excitement. "The large one lifted the middle one, who lifted the small one, and they formed a tower. Like a team!" She made her way to the observation deck to witness this apparent miracle firsthand. And what she saw made her question whether someone had replaced the cubs with remarkably well-trained imposters. Vex, Nyx, and Zim were indeed working as a coordinated unit, but instead of their previous chaotic territorial displays, they were helping. Zim had apparently appointed himself protector of a small group of herbivorous younglings who were having trouble accessing their learning terminals. Rather than intimidating them into compliance, he was patiently demonstrating how to adjust the interface settings for their species' visual requirements. His white-patched fur made him less imposing than his packmates, and the smaller species seemed to find his presence reassuring rather than threatening. "This is—" Kel appeared beside her, their skin cycling through confused purples and greens. "This is not what I expected." "It's exactly what I expected," Lila lied smoothly, because honestly, she'd hoped for improvement. But this level of behavioral transformation in less than 1 shift was bordering on miraculous. Predator species learn fast when they're properly motivated. Nyx had taken charge of organizing the common area's recreational equipment, turning what had previously been a chaotic free-for-all into something resembling structured play periods. She'd established rotation schedules that ensured every species got access to their preferred activities, and, most remarkably, was enforcing them through negotiation rather than intimidation. "The female cub has distributed schedule assignments to all the younglings," Kel reported, consulting their data pad with the tone of someone reading intelligence reports from an alternate universe. "Voluntary compliance is at 96%. And Vex? The Alpha has appointed himself guardian of the meal preparation area. 3 separate incidents of food aggression have been resolved through what witnesses describe as firm but fair mediation." Lila, Kyle, watched as Vex carefully separated 2 younglings who'd been arguing over access to a particular nutritional dispenser. Instead of simply asserting dominance, he listened to both sides, then demonstrated how the dispenser could be programmed to provide appropriate nutrition for both species simultaneously. The arguing younglings seemed as surprised as anyone that their problem had been solved rather than simply shut down. They're not just following instructions, Lila mused. They're adapting the concept to fit situations I never specifically covered. Is that good? It's better than good, Kel. It means they actually understand what we're trying to accomplish, instead of just going through the motions. The real test came on the second day, when the cubs encountered their first serious challenge. Lila was reviewing logistics reports when the emergency alert chimed through the station's communication system. Not a catastrophic emergency. The tone was too measured for that, but something requiring immediate administrative attention. She found Kel in the Central Coordination Center, surrounded by multiple displays showing various angles of what appeared to be a standoff in Section B. What's the situation? A pack of older creche younglings arrived on the morning transport, Kel explained, their skin showing stress patterns that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. They're demanding access to resources that are already allocated to the younger species, and they're not accepting our standard protocols. Lila studied the feeds. The creche were reptilian predators, larger and more aggressive than the Vorthac, with a well-documented tendency toward bullying behavior when they encountered smaller species. 6 of them had cornered a mixed group of younger aliens near the recreational facilities, and their body language suggested they were working up to something unpleasant. Where are our cubs? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Kel's voice took on the careful tone of someone delivering potentially explosive news. They're not in their assigned areas. They disappeared from the monitoring grid approximately 10 minutes ago. Lila felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. If the cubs had reverted to their old territorial behavior in response to competition from larger predators, the entire experiment would be over before it had really begun. Pull up Section B, all angles. The displays shifted, and what Lila saw made her breath catch. The 3 Vorthac cubs hadn't disappeared. They'd positioned themselves strategically around the creche group, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. But they weren't attacking. Zim had somehow gotten behind the creche without being detected, placing himself between the bullies and the exit. His positioning effectively cut off their retreat route while appearing to be completely coincidental. Nix had approached from the side, engaging the creche leader in what looked like casual conversation while gradually drawing the group's attention away from their intended victims. And Vex had walked directly into the middle of the confrontation and was talking. Can we get audio on this? Kel's fingers flew over their interface, and suddenly the confrontation's voices filled the coordination center. Understand you're new to the station, Vex was saying, his tone carrying the patient authority of someone who'd learned to project leadership rather than dominance. But these recreational periods are scheduled to ensure everyone gets access. The younglings here have reserved time until the next rotation. The creche leader, easily twice Vex's size, postured aggressively. We are creche. We take what we need. Small prey waits. Actually, Nix interjected smoothly, that's not how things work here. We have systems that ensure everyone's needs are met, but they require cooperation. I'd be happy to show you the scheduling interface. You dare to lecture your betters, small predator. The tension in the room was palpable, even through the display feeds. This was the moment where everything could go catastrophically wrong, where the cubs would either prove they'd internalized Lila's lessons or revert to their species' more primitive responses to challenge. Zim spoke up from his position behind the creche group, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made even Lila pay attention. We're the junior guards for this section. Our job is to make sure everyone follows station protocols and that smaller species are protected. You can either work with us to find a solution that meets your needs without disrupting theirs, or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but somehow the unspoken alternative hung in the air with more weight than any direct threat could have carried. The creche leader looked around, apparently realizing for the first time that his group was now completely surrounded by three much smaller predators who were displaying none of the fear or submission he'd expected. "This is not how predator species behave," he said, confusion replacing aggression in his tone. "Maybe not," Vex replied, "but it's how guards behave. And on this station, protecting others earns more respect than dominating them." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, incredibly, the creche leader's posture shifted from aggressive to merely defensive. "Show us these scheduling protocols," he said grudgingly. "But we will not wait long." "Fair enough," Nix replied, producing a datapad with the efficiency of someone who'd been prepared for exactly this contingency. "The next open slot for your group size is in 43 minutes. I can show you the station's other facilities while you wait, if you'd like." As the confrontation dissolved into actual problem-solving, Lila found herself staring at the displays in something approaching awe. "Commander," Kell said quietly, "I believe your experiment may be working." "Yeah," Lila replied, watching as the three cubs efficiently managed a situation that could have required security intervention and possibly medical assistance. "I'm starting to think so, too." But even as she watched their success, a part of her mind was already calculating the next challenge. Word of this incident would spread through the station quickly, and not everyone would be pleased to learn that three young predators had successfully established themselves as peacekeepers. Some reactions, she suspected, might be significantly more complicated than anything they'd faced so far. The challenge arrived exactly when Lila should have expected it, at the worst possible moment. She was in the middle of presenting the cubs with their first earned uniform pieces when Kell burst into the ceremony area with all the grace of a collapsing star. Their skin had gone beyond stress colors into what Lila was pretty sure were previously unknown shades of panic. "Commander, we have a situation. Code Orange, possibly Code Red, maybe even—" "Breathe, Kell. What's happening?" "Administrator Mektar is here, from Central Command. He's demanding an immediate review of what he's calling unauthorized militarization of indigenous youth populations." Lila felt every muscle in her body tense. Mektar wasn't just any bureaucrat. He represented the faction within the Federation that believed humans were inherently too aggressive for civilized space, and that human influence on other species was dangerous by definition. How much does he know? Everything. Someone filed a formal complaint about the cubs' new role as protectors. Multiple someones, actually. There are allegations of human military indoctrination, concerns about predator species being weaponized, and— Kell's voice dropped to a whisper— questions about whether this entire program is a human military recruitment operation. The three cubs, who had been practically vibrating with excitement over their new basic gear moments before, now stood in formation with the instant alertness of trained soldiers. Which, Lila realized grimly, was probably exactly the wrong impression to give Mektar. "At ease," she told them quietly. "This isn't your fight." "Respectfully, Commander," Vex replied, his voice carrying new authority along with his new utility belt. "If someone is challenging our right to serve as guards, then it absolutely is our fight." Before Lila could respond, the ceremony area's main entrance dilated to admit Administrator Mektar and what appeared to be half the station's senior staff. Mektar himself was imposing in the way that certain species managed. Tall, angular, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and eyes that suggested he'd rather be dissecting problems than solving them. Commander Lila, his voice carried the crisp precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I'm here to investigate reports of serious protocol violations regarding your handling of predator species youth. Administrator Mektar, I wasn't aware Central Command had concerns about our educational integration programs. Educational integration? Mektar's laugh was sharp enough to cut metal. I'm told you've been running military training exercises for species-specific combat units, that you've created uniforms, rank structures, and assigned territorial defense responsibilities to children. I've implemented a merit-based behavioral modification program that channels natural predator instincts toward protective rather than dominance behaviors, Lila replied carefully. The results have been remarkable. The results, Mektar said, producing a datapad and reading from it with theatrical precision, include multiple reports of these cubs engaging in territorial enforcement, intimidation of other species, and establishment of unauthorized authority structures within civilian areas. Lila felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything he was describing was technically accurate, but stripped of context it sounded like exactly the kind of human militarization that Federation hardliners had been warning against for decades. If I may, Nyx stepped forward with the fluid confidence she'd developed over the past few days. Administrator Mektar, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about our activities. Mektar's attention snapped to her with the intensity of a targeting system. You are Junior Guard Nyx, sir, and with respect, the reports you've received appear to be missing important context about what we actually do here. Junior Guard? Mektar's tone could have frozen stellar plasma. You're a child. You have no authority to claim military titles. Actually, Zim spoke up, his voice steady despite the obvious threat Mektar represented, we earned these positions through demonstrated competence in protection and service. Would you like us to show you what that means? Before anyone could stop him, Zim activated his communicator with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been using it for weeks rather than days. All younglings in sections B through D, please respond if you need assistance with anything. This is Junior Guard Zim, conducting routine welfare checks. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Voices filled the communication channel. Younglings reporting successful completion of educational activities, requesting help with technical issues, and generally treating the cubs like trusted authority figures. Junior Guard Vex, came one small voice. The Melaran younglings in Section C are having trouble with their nutritional requirements again. Could you help us adjust the dispensers? On my way, Vex responded automatically, then caught himself as he remembered their audience. After I finish with some administrative matters. Mektar stared at the cubs with the expression of someone watching his worldview rearrange itself in real time. This is not what I was told to expect. What exactly were you told? Lila asked, though she suspected she already knew. That human military personnel were training predator species younglings as enforcement units. That territorial aggression had increased. That smaller species were being intimidated into compliance with human authority structures. And technically, Nyx said with the diplomatic precision of someone who'd learned to navigate complex social dynamics, all of those things are true. But perhaps you'd like to see the implementation before drawing conclusions about the intent? What happened next would have been impossible to orchestrate, which was what made it perfect. the station's emergency alert system activated with the distinctive pattern that indicated environmental hazard, not life-threatening, but requiring immediate evacuation of affected areas. A coolant leak in Section F had triggered automated containment protocols, and approximately 60 younglings of various species needed to be relocated to safe areas until repairs could be completed. Mektar found himself with a front-row seat to what Leela privately thought of as the Cubs' final examination. Vex immediately took charge of the evacuation coordination, but instead of issuing orders, he began organizing voluntary response teams from among the older younglings. Nix deployed to Section F to assess the situation firsthand and provide real-time updates to the coordination center. And Zim? Zim did something that made even Lila's breath catch. He positioned himself at the evacuation route's bottleneck point and began what could only be described as emergency counseling for the younger species who were panicking about the situation. His white-patched fur and smaller size made him approachable, but his calm authority, earned through days of patient service, gave his words weight. "It's just a coolant leak," he told a group of terrified herbivorous younglings. "The station's systems caught it early, and we're moving everyone to safe areas as a precaution. I'm going to stay with you until we get to the relocation center. And Junior Guard Vex has already confirmed that all your parents have been notified." "But what if the station breaks?" one of them asked, clearly fighting back tears. "Then we fix it," Zim replied with absolute confidence. "That's what guards do. We protect, we serve, and we make sure everyone gets home safely." Mektar watched this scene unfold with the expression of someone having a fundamental philosophical crisis. They're actually protecting them." "Yes," Lila said quietly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency, but military efficiency in service of civilian protection rather than conquest. The Cubs coordinated with station personnel, managed crowd control through patience rather than intimidation, and maintained constant communication to ensure no one was left behind or forgotten. When the all-clear signal sounded 2 hours later, Mektar had witnessed something that challenged every assumption he'd brought to the station. "Commander Leela," he said finally, his voice carrying a complexity of emotions that hadn't been there before. "I came here prepared to shut down what I believed was a dangerous military indoctrination program. And now? Now I'm wondering if the Federation has been approaching predator species integration incorrectly for decades." He looked at the 3 Cubs, who were helping coordinate the return to normal activities with the same calm competence they'd shown throughout the crisis. "These younglings aren't being turned into weapons. They're being turned into— what's the human term?" "Guardians," Lila supplied. "Protectors. Public servants. And the uniform system you've implemented, it's not about creating military units. It's about creating accountability and earned respect." "The uniform is just a symbol," Vex said, overhearing the conversation. "What matters is what we do to earn the right to wear it." Mektar was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd witnessed. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. "Commander Lila, I'm recommending that this program be expanded to other Federation stations, with proper oversight and documentation, of course." "Of course," Lila agreed, fighting to keep the triumph out of her voice. "And I'm formally recognizing the Cubs' junior guard status within Federation protocols. If they're going to serve as protectors, they should have the official authority to do so effectively." The 3 Cubs exchanged glances that were equal parts excitement and determination. "There is one condition," Mektar continued. "This program's success will depend on having proper leadership and training protocols. I'm recommending that junior guards from successful programs be authorized to establish similar initiatives at other stations, with appropriate human military advisors to ensure consistent implementation. Lila blinked. You're suggesting that the cubs train other predator species younglings? I'm suggesting that we've discovered something remarkable here. A way to transform natural predator instincts into protective service. That knowledge should be shared. 6 months later, Lila stood in the observation deck of Station 23, watching a pack of young creche predators help evacuate a group of herbivorous younglings during a routine drill. Their instructor, Junior Guard Nix, moved between them with the confidence of someone who'd learned that true authority came from service rather than dominance. The program had spread to 18 stations across 3 sectors, and the waiting list for human-style protective service training had grown longer than anyone had anticipated. "Commander?" came a familiar voice behind her. Kel had requested transfer to help coordinate the I.O. expanding program, their anxiety apparently cured by the realization that sometimes the most chaotic situations just needed the right kind of structure. "What's the latest report?" Station 15 just graduated their 3rd class of junior guards. Station 31 is requesting additional human advisors. And Kel paused, their skin showing colors that Lila had learned indicated excitement. "We've received our first application from a non-predator species. Apparently, some of the herbivorous younglings want to earn protective service uniforms too." Leela smiled, watching as the cubs, who had once terrorized a station with stolen shoes and belts, now taught others that the best way to wear a uniform was to earn it through service to others. Humans, it turned out, weren't the only species that could benefit from learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was protect someone smaller than yourself. But they had been the first to figure out how to make it look good while doing it.